Let's talk about strategy. Anytime you play a competitive game, you need to formulate a strategy to figure out how to win, even if it's just a subconscious thing. Some people want to play up close and personal, not giving their opponent time to think about what they're doing and forcing them to guess what the next option is. Some people want to play very far back, slowly whittling away their opponent's life bar in order to frustrate them into opening themselves up. Some people just want to down a pint of cellar and swing for the fences. Point being, at some point you'll have to make a decision on where you want to be on the screen and how you're going to beat your enemy. But there's a hurdle you have to overcome in order to get to your preferred position. You have to win the neutral game. As defined by the fighting game glossary, neutral is a state of a fight where neither player is blocking or getting hit by anything, and you're trying to figure out the best way to start and continue your game plan. The majority of the fight will take place in neutral, and different characters have different ways about dealing with the neutral game depending on their kit and archetype. Some characters are amazing at controlling neutral, and others have a hard time in neutral, but all are able to excel once they get their game plans working. For example, if we look at Guilty Gear Strive characters, some characters who excel in the neutral game would be Kai and Axel, as they're both able to control space on the screen very well with their projectiles and long-reaching buttons. By using these attacks, they're able to control the position of their enemy on the screen, be it pushing them back because they block the attack, having them jump over the attack to avoid it, or giving up space to get away from your buttons. This is referred to as making your opponent dance, as you're forcing them to move in ways that can be seen as advantageous to you. Not everyone wants to play the neutral game though. While Leo has tools that can force his opponent to dance, he excels once he enters his back turn stance and puts his enemy into the blender. For Leo, neutral is something that you have to overcome in order to get closer to his win condition. Whereas Kai and Axel want to keep you in the neutral game as long as possible because we all know it's easier to beat your opponent when they're comatose at their desk. Examples like this can be found across every fighting game, though they look slightly different. Wait, what do you mean every fighting game? I thought of all people you should know that not every game has deep and interesting neutral like mine. I only play the best neutral-based games like Samurai Showdown and Nitro plus Blasters Heroine's Infinite Duel. Truly, only the most pristine neutral-based games in the genre. Are you really going to tell me that this piece of shit anime 3v3 dweeb trash has as much neutral as my beloved SNK heroines? You are a fool, sir! A fool and a charlatan! Yeah, it does, actually. Neutral isn't just a binary thing that a game has. It looks very different depending on the game that we're talking about. The way these games have neutral can generally be plotted on a scale like this. What are the ends of the scale? We'll get to it, but I think it's best if we look at the middle of the scale first so we can see the most talked about strategies in neutral. So, let's look at Street Fighter. Ask any Street Fighter player and they'll tell you that Street Fighter is the pinnacle of neutral, the absolute essence of footage, the cream of the crop for mind games and fighting games. Tell this to any other fighting game player and they'll just laugh at you. In all seriousness though, Street Fighter has a lot of ways that characters can go around neutral. A lot of characters want to play Footsies, which is a mobile game for Android devices, now with a Steam edition and rollback. Footsies, in essence, is about controlling the battlefield in order to get to your preferred range. The general way that this is done is with long-reaching buttons known as pokes that can control a large area in front of you and leave you safe on block. If the poke is blocked, then you return back to neutral, but if it connects, you can transition it into a different move. This is called a hit confirm, and it's the basics of Street Fighter's footsies. But if your opponent is just throwing out pokes, how do you deal with that? Well, the move doesn't go full screen. Fuck off, Dhalsim! So if you walk into the range where it would hit you and then walk back, the opponent might try to swing at you. Notice how they missed. What a dumbass. When the opponent misses their attacks, we call it a whiff, and since they're recovering from their attack, they won't be able to block or move, meaning that you can hit them for free. This is called a whiff punish, and a lot of characters in Street Fighter V base their game plan around getting their opponent to whiff. Street Fighter doesn't just have footsies though. A lot of characters are able to use some form of projectile in order to control a specific section of the screen. This is generally the ground, however some characters like Sakura have projectiles that are able to go upwards to catch the opponents that are jumping. Projectiles are able to expand the neutral to further reaches of the screen, as you can make your opponent move out of a specific position. This is generally by forcing your opponent to commit to an approach option or take a certain amount of chip damage by blocking the projectile. These approach options are generally unsafe, with the most common being simply jumping over it. Fun fact, did you know that you can't block in the air in Street Fighter? If you hit someone out of the air, it's called an anti-air. All of these things combined lead to the basic neutral game that has been around since Street Fighter 2 in the arcades, with each iteration of Street Fighter adding slight differences. Not enough to make the neutral feel like it's completely different, but enough for them to stand out from each other. So let's go back to our scale. With Street Fighter in the middle, we can see this as the traditional 2D fighting game neutral. Some projectiles, some footsies, pretty well rounded. So what's over at this end then? This is where we put the games that lead to more towards footsies and less fleeing your shit from the back corner. Tekken is an amazing example of this kind of game. Tekken doesn't really have projectiles, and the ones that are in the game come from characters that are based off of 2D games or are just really bad. Except for the gun though. I might be out of rage, Heihachi, but I ain't out of options. This is due to the fact that players are able to just step out of the way and whiff punish them. Sidestepping completely changes how the neutral game functions, and now even when you're directly in front of your enemy, you're able to force them to whiff by stepping to the correct side. Tekken combos are already really punishing, so getting your opponent to whiff in a game is extremely powerful. This is also helped by the fact that the movement in this game is just fast and responsive, once you know how to do it. This is also emphasized with the fact that a lot of characters have moves that move them in a way that is able to avoid different moves in order to make your opponent whiff for doing specific moves. Why did I make that sentence so complicated? The way that movement is changed and the lack of projectiles means that footsies is emphasized much more. Pokes are still reliably long, but generally have large weaknesses. They can be slow, so they're easily interruptible. They can be extremely linear, so they're easy to sidestep, or they can be ducked or low parried. Not to mention, even the longer strings are able to be backdashed and punished thanks to the technique known as Korean backdashing. Basically, in Tekken, dashes can be cancelled into anything. So if you backdash, you can cancel it into a crouch to reset yourself to neutral. Then you just backdash again. So you do backdash, down back, backdash, down back, backdash, down back, back, down back. This allows you to move much faster than just trying to constantly backdash, and it's very hard to do. So let's move on to something before I start embarrassing myself further. With advanced movement and the fact that the game is basically always played extremely close up, this leads to extremely tense and beautiful to watch neutral. It's like a dance, bro. I just love Tekken. I want to be good at this game. Other games around this area are like Samurai Showdown and footsies. But what's on the other end of the scale? Well, it's timely fine to talk about NetherRealm's Dragon Ball FighterZ, baby! Get that projectile shit out of my face! Hit him with a motherfucking beam! Dragon Ball FighterZ has an interesting relationship with neutral. A lot of people will say that the game has no neutral at all, but neutral in FighterZ is actually really interesting due to the fact that wherever you are on the screen, you're not safe from being at the start of a combo. Basically, every character in the game has a projectile that is able to travel across the screen at ground level. Most of these characters have a beam, which is a projectile that hits everything that's on the floor. This means that you're able to cover the entirety of the bottom section of the screen and force your enemy to enter the air to try and get away. With this being a versus game, you can also use these beams as assists, meaning you're able to approach while a teammate covers the bottom section of the screen. This means you're able to call an assist to get your enemy to block and let you run up to your enemy to begin your offense. That's if they're staying on the ground. A lot of Dragon Ball's neutral happens in the air thanks to the fact that you can double jump, air dash, and block while you're jumping, meaning that you don't have to worry too much about anti-airs. They're absolutely still a thing, but you don't have to worry about them as much. If you use your assists right, you'll be able to completely cover the screen with all sorts of bullshit that makes it impossible to approach and force you to be locked down, unless you're doing the same thing. Along with Super Dash and Vanish, you're able to get into your preferred range off of a straight assist and convert into combos really easily, which honestly feels really good. This does mean, however, that things like whiff punishing and footsies generally not something you focus on. The closest you'll get is backdashing after somebody's vanishes in order to get away from their light attack, which is still pretty risky against most characters. But just because it doesn't have these things doesn't mean it isn't neutral, it's just different. Neutral is an interesting concept that changes drastically between game to game. No two games have the same neutral, and that's okay. It's what makes these games unique and fun. If every fighting game had Street Fighter neutral, honestly, I think I'd hate it. But that also goes the same for every game having neutral like FighterZ or Tekken. The way you go about getting into the fight is part of the fun of these games, and understanding how to play the neutral is important, but also part of the fun of fighting games. Neutral's cool, and even if it looks like people are finding ways to skip it, it's still there. You just have to think about it differently sometimes.